So at this point it should be pretty clear that Winston is kind of grasping at straws and trying to poke holes in very small things that don't really matter to try to win this debate. The biggest point of this is he's trying to talk about how I don't have standards, when it's very clear that I do have standards, which are the UN's Declaration of Human Rights, Universal Declaration of Human Rights, which lays out all of the things that you need to have women have human rights. So that's a pretty clear standard. I mean, he started just talking about this recently, but from the very start of this debate, I proposed this as the standard for what women's rights are. And so I think that should be very clear. There's other things that he's trying to obfuscate as well. Some of these include the idea of other options being available and alternatives being available. So think about that for a second. I'm sure that there are some other options that exist, none of which have been talked about in this round. And so I'd really like you to think about what options are out there for making these really oppressive governments change their habits and change how they treat women and how they structure their laws to help women or hurt women. So think about that. What are the options that these countries have? I think at the end of this round, you're probably going to have only one of these things in your mind about how we can convince these countries to change. And that way that you change is by withholding foreign aid and using that as leverage through either government legitimacy or other means to try to try to change these countries from within. If you can think of some other system, then maybe Winston has some availability to get this to get access to stopping all these terrible violations of women's autonomy and human rights. But other than that, he doesn't really have a way. Because we've basically conceded that this impact of women being subjugated to a less than human status, being raped, being circumcised in ways that they don't necessarily want to, and all of it being allowed by the law, we understand that this is very important. Both sides have basically conceded that this is very important. He tries to get around this fact by saying that, oh no, it's not even going to happen in the first place, but he doesn't touch the main point of this argument, which is that it's a really big and terrible thing. And so the fact that he doesn't do that means that you need to look to stop this first. This should be your ultimate goal in the round. Try to find some way in which you can minimize the suffering that goes on to women, so that you can take them from this subhuman status that these societies turn them into, and you can bring them back up to a level that is decent and is expected by most societies, and any fair society at that. So just a little bit of housekeeping before you make your decision in this round. Winston talked about a few things that are very minor blippy points about like Dutch aid. First off, not the U.S., and second off, super small, 4% return. That's like 1% above 3%, which is what a normal economy gets. So obviously, just take that out of the debate. Moreover, he talks about Cuba, but what this proves is that you can withhold aid or withhold economic transactions, and that is eventually going to change things. We lifted the embargo just recently we improved our diplomatic talks after withholding foreign aid in the form of having an embargo there. And so what this means is that we've basically solved the problem in the exact same way that I'm proposing as the affirmative. So the argument turns. I'm allowed to make this argument because he brought it up in the second speech. It's basically going to be cold turned and he's going to lose, and that's why you don't bring up new arguments in your second speech. You bring them up all in your first speeches. That otherwise, the last speaker is going to turn the arguments, and there's going to be nothing against them. So remember to do that in your debates. Thank you. Finally, the only other thing you probably want to vote on would be Kenya, and so I think I've covered that well enough. But the problem there is with the donors. If Kenya's not changing from 1995, his evidence was, if they're not changing from like 1995, it's the donors' fault. They need to withhold that aid so that Kenya's actually going to reform. That's what I'm standing for. Withhold that aid. Eventually, that's when you're going to get the solution. Because of that, I think it's clear the only way to actually change and stop these harms is to vote for the proposition. Thank you.